Hello, everyone, and welcome to Shifting Gears with SDV's webinar series. My name is Serena, and joining us today is Aster and Johan, who will be presenting Navigating the Future with OSS in the Automotive Industry. If you have any questions for Johan or Aster as we move through today's presentation, feel free to ask it in the chat or use the Ask a Questions tab. Without any further delay, Aster, Johan, over to you.
Awesome. Thanks. Okay, so my name is Johan Linåke. I'm a senior researcher at RISE, the National Research Institutes in Sweden, and my best buddy Aster. You want to say something?
Yes, I am Pastor Nimmelin Karlberg is my full name. I'm the executive director of Open Forum Europe. We're a think tank working on anything open in the kind of political or public policy domain. So open source, open standards, open data, open access, etc. And yeah, we have written a paper that we are happy to present today.
Definitely. So this is titled Navigating the Future with Open Source in the Automotive Industry. So we were asked to do a study to really investigate or explore what role that open source software can have in enabling the automotive industry of tomorrow. And what we kind of found out, or our main message was that it's really time for the automotive industry, for us all to come together and really rethink the way in how we are doing collaboration and competition in combination here to move forward, and especially considering this very rapid and changing environment that we're living in. We're seeing this regionalization between continents, within continents. We're seeing this rapid increased pace in how technology is developing, and we're seeing this how the automotive industry is transitioning from being more manufacturer hardware oriented to becoming more software centric, talking about the software defined vehicle, and at the same time managing increased regulations on software that has previously been limited to hardware. So in this situation, open source really is a good lever and a tool to help us all come together and manage these different challenges and move forward towards the software-defined vehicle and embracing the opportunities that technology is offering us. And a good thing here is that we've seen that we are on a trajectory here within the industry towards a very positive direction. Among the forerunners within the industry, the more mature ones, open source already is a recognized part of business strategies, of IT strategies, digitalization strategies. It is seen as a driver for expediting innovation, operational efficiency, collaboration, so on and so forth.
Yeah, Johan, I just thought maybe I should quickly just make a point and preempt some things that I'm going to say later, of just mentioning like the broader political angle and contextualize the study on the automotive industry, because we work at OFE with European policymaking. Think the European Commission comes up with something in a strategy or a policy or a law, and from our point of view, the automotive industry is one of the key, most strategic industries that Europe cares about, broadly speaking. The supply chains kind of crisscross the entire continent, and it is, the automotive industry is a very large direct and indirect employer, etc. It has that kind of political strategic heft, and the challenges that and opportunities faced by the automotive industry, a lot of lessons and relevant insights can be generalized across the European economy or society, for that matter, global. But we have a fairly European perspective, both in this report, but also at our work at OFE. So we'll get to that at the end, but there's going to be, we're going to have some discussions, hopefully with you. Maybe we can answer some questions around the political interests and, let's say, broad strategic economic interests in enabling and creating value from open source for the automotive industry. Because one way of seeing it is that we're also using here open source as a kind of proxy of just software competence. If you're good at software, you're almost automatically good at open source. But that's just, sorry, I just jumped in because I wanted to say it earlier. But you, now you take it away and actually get into the findings that we made.
Oh, but I mean, it's an important thing to highlight is this really that government and policy and regionalization of what we're experiencing, like globally, it really impacts in this shift that we're experiencing, and was really key throughout the investigation that we did and many of the interviews that we performed. Yeah, but continue on as we were heading. We have a lot of forerunners within the industry that are leading this change, being more this business driven, driving the collaborations. But to get the industry really moving together collectively, they need to continue taking on this higher level of responsibility, but also in turn helping the rest of the industry that is more engineering driven to help them continue in their maturity journey, help them going beyond just repetitive reuse and focusing on compliance to actually lifting open source into the business strategy, seeing how open collaboration can help and excel their business onwards, and seeing the different values coming out of that. Taking a more look at the actual adoption of open source, we can look starting inside. The adoption of open source is quite narrow and limited, and for many reasons. One being, of course, the safety critical nature of the car and the functional safety standards and the requirements they put on how the software is developed, the different artifacts and so on. We'll come back to that, but we can just say that most of the open source really comes or can be found in the more non-critical parts here, like infotainment systems. Although we are seeing increasing adoption in different kinds of ECUs, mainly in terms of the communication, but also connectivity towards the more cloud services and over-there updates um, as our defining features in terms of the SDV. If we look outside of the cars and vehicles, we can find the adoption much like we'll see in any other industry in terms of development tools, infrastructure, cloud services provisioning, but especially also in terms of simulating the cars and the journeys and all the quality assurance aspects. Looking at the hardware, we're also experiencing a transition from the 150, 250-ish ECUs down to maybe 2 or 3 main computing units within the cars, being more powerful and centralizing all of the software and processes running. So this puts a lot of higher demands in terms of performance, power, but especially security in separating the different processes here we have running in the car, making sure that they are airtight voltages between, so we're really removing any types of security threats here. And going onwards in terms of this software-defined vehicle platform that we're envisioning, it's not just one platform, rather it's different configurations of platforms. So really imagine Lego bricks. As you can probably see behind me here, I have a lot of Lego here with my two kids are playing with constantly. It's you tailor the platform based on your needs. You can exchange the different building blocks based on your needs. Some will be open source, some will be proprietary. There will be different vendors for both of them. And you put together, just as you can see the cloud stacks, you probably put together the platform that suits your needs and then tailor on top for your specific requirements. We'll probably see different layers of middleware and containerization running the different processes in parallel. One layer that was very highlighted, and it aligns with the general SDV concept of being from the connectivity perspective, was the more services or levels connected with the environment and the cloud services and so on. To really make this all work together, we need to define the different interfaces, so that these building blocks actually can be exchanged and replaced against each other. So this is really a key practice for this to move to mature. So we're not just talking about co co-developing and co-first. We also need to talk about the standards and how we define the interfaces. And one thing, or many things driving this change is technology, of course. And on the high level, we can identify four main drivers here. One being electrification, second being autonomous driving, connectivity, but also this servitization, where we're seeing more service-oriented business models coming into play. These all together add so much complexity that it's not manageable by one single actor, and this really again highlights this need for the industry to come together more cautiously, as they're doing, for example, through the Eclipse SDV working group and many of the other collaborations within the industry. And this is really helping to move from the more hardware centric to the more software centric side, transitioning and becoming more like software businesses rather than manufacturers. Um, this development is maybe not the most rapid one in our human history, but there are different predictions here. Some of the people we talked to said 2 to 3 years before we have an SDV platform and functional safety open source running in the cars. Some said 10 to 15 years. Despite whatever prediction, there are many good reasons for this. On the one sense, we're talking about the very safety critical product here that we are all entering more or less on a daily basis. The functional safety certifications puts demands on how the software is developed. What artifacts that needs to come out, and complexity increases as for each new code contribution and release of the software that certification needs to be run, which can be rather complex and costly. Another aspect is the more lifelong, the very long lifespan that we have on these products or the vehicles, going well beyond 10 to 15 years. And that's typically more than what we can expect of open source. There are a lot of good examples of mature open source projects that have been around for 25 plus years. But having that requirement on all kinds of open source software is very high. So we need to find ways in how we can really ensure the sustainability. And then we have this long history of the automotive industry being very conservative and a very competitive in nature. It's 100 plus years, so I mean that's reasonable. There's a lot of cultural legacy in that sense. Then we have these hierarchical supply chain structures, working with OEMs, tier ones, tier twos, and so on in these intra industry verticals. I'll come back to. So to address these very complex challenges, one aspect is really that we need to grow the knowledge and capabilities in terms of understanding what open source is, how it can be leveraged both strategically and operationally and in collaboration within the industry. And especially in terms of management and C-level, really helping them to understand these aspects. And here, the forerunners within the industry can really, and also open source foundations or stewards can take a big role in helping the others come along and going from the more engineering driven to the more business driven, really picking up on open source internally. Relating to this is also securing that there is an availability and attraction of skilled and talented personnel for the automotive industry. This cultural legacy that I talked about, and also technical legacy, was quite frequently mentioned as barriers or inhibiting the attraction of talented people, that are moving more towards like tech sector. But there were still hopes that this increasing adoption of open source and this transition that we're seeing towards the SDV can really help in this making the industry more attractive towards the industry and making more competitive. But this really needs the drums and pipes and whistles to make this everyone aware of this message, because a lot of people may not. Another important aspect is the more introduction of what's called OSPOs, or open source program offices. In essence, we're talking about internal centers of competency, so bringing in internal champions, experts that can help grow the necessary culture, introduce the relevant processes, and enabling developers to adopt open source, helping managers, C-level, to understand how to introduce it into the business strategy and how to act on it. So we're seeing an increasing adoption of both among OEMs and tier ones in this case, just as many other industries outside automotive. And then going back to this more hierarchical structure that we have in the ecosystem, where you have these internal verticals, we need to break these silos so that we can start collaborating and sourcing between them. But on a positive note, we're seeing this kind of transition already. These many logos really highlight that there is a lot of collaborations, a lot of talks ongoing already. Some say that it's difficult to get an overview of all of these initiatives, and especially in engaging in them all. But on a positive note, many are also seeing how they are becoming more and more complementary and integrating into each other and promoting a more collective action, collaboration, driving the development forward. And we're also seeing this collaboration nurturing growing between the OEMs and tier ones, where tier ones are typically described as being more progressive and driving open source, and helping OEMs to adopt it in the source components. While as for the OEM side, they are seeing a greater potential for or need to control their software stacks, especially in terms of current and upcoming regulations that we talked about. Maybe Astor can comment on that later. So here, open source provides a way to really gain control and collaborate on it at the same time. Additionally, also highlighted was this need to not just look within the industry, but also look outside of the industry, because we can't solve all of these challenges within the industry. A lot of the interviewees highlighted collaborations ongoing with more tech giants such as Google, Microsoft, Amazon, and their technology stacks and engineering power as pivotal in order to really move forward in this space. There was some concern raised, so not becoming the mobile industry, where with a heavy reliance on a specific platform or a specific vendor, taking Android into phones as an example. But still, if everyone is aware and collaborates in a more open fashion, there was still a lot of trust and hopes that this would not be an issue. Another pivotal enabler for collaboration is also identifying and agreeing on what to collaborate on. And here, this is a very general challenge, I would say, across industries, is identifying, okay, what's commodity, or what's technology that everyone needs, and what's the differentiating parts, what's the stuff that really adds value and competitive edge. And typically the later part is everything from 20 to 5% to whoever you talk to. The rest is really, yeah, that's what everyone's in need of. That's not what's adding value. This is what you can collaborate on. And as technology progresses in a quite fast pace, we see a need for the industry to become more agile and agree more consistently in okay, this we all need, this is what we can collaborate on. So getting a more common view on these two parts, so that can really help in accelerating the transition here. And then we have the functional safety perspective, as we talked about. We're seeing developments in the functional safety standards, but there's very few examples of functional safety certified software out there. One exception being the Eclipse Red X donated by Microsoft not long ago. But here we need to find ways in how vendors can develop more continuous certification processes, as Red Hat is doing on their in-vehicle operating system, how foundation or open source stewards can act as a certification body or help their members in certifying the open source projects included, so on and so forth. So that's a very big challenge going forward. And then coming back to what we also talked about, this sustainability challenges. The automotive industry needs to compare their software bill of materials. They need to really see, okay, what projects are we all dependent on? Where do we need to go in, improve collectively, and work on who's taking responsibility for this project or that project or that project? Where do we need to, what holes do we need to fix, and how can we create a sustainable regime that really addresses this on a collective high level? Yeah, and maybe I'll transition to Astor from this slide.
Yes, but you also be in control of it. Yeah, this is just one of our favorite quotes, just because we think that it summarized, let's say, the deeper insight and this very much talked about transition from, or let's say, softwareization of the value proposition of what a car is, or what mobility is, and just the central presence of software, or how software is eating the world. And for the automotive industry, just like any other industry, software and by extension open source is key. And thus it becomes quite interesting to look at what the automotive industry, generally speaking, does differently when compared to some software companies. But before we get into the key things about what maybe certain C-level executives need to rethink in our point of view, I think it's interesting to look at what governments, and for us in particular, the European Commission is thinking about it. And generally, the feedback that we're getting from the key units at the European Commission is that they see themselves as able to provide kind of a neutral ground and, trusted facilitation to drive change towards more collaboration higher up in the tech stack between companies that are traditionally very intense competitors. It is a pretty deep, well, first soul searching and then adjustment in strategy that would be needed to really facilitate the level of collaboration that the Commission sees as necessary to maintain the competitiveness of the European automotive industry. And having a neutral ground or a place where, let's say, there doesn't have to be one first mover. You can solve some free rider challenges, perhaps. That is the role that the Commission, or potential role that the Commission sees itself being able to play, but also some national governments. Now, that's easier said than done, but a tool that is always at hand for the European Commission is directed funding. So you can, on the one hand, fund neutral platforms, this be for people to meet and get to know each other. This is in the world of open source, that you can talk a lot about the code, but at the same time, there are thousands and thousands of conferences because people need to meet and get to know each other for, those deep relationships that enable high-level collaboration to be established. Not also a discussion that we didn't really get into in the report, but because there's not really enough meat on the bone yet as an idea, but conversations that we had both with automotive companies as well as the government is just let's say the nervousness around sharing IP generally. And there could be, this is very investigated yet still, but there could be a role for government funding in, let's say, making it less risky to share IP in certain key areas. Maybe there could be even conversations around tax breaks with certain countries when it comes to sharing code, or in particular code or IP as to an open source project. This research in this field has been conducted more generally on the economy. There are very strong econometric arguments for tax breaks for companies that share a lot more open source. Something specifically for the automotive industry has not been done, but it's an avenue that could be looked into. But here it should be said that the interest of governments is different than the individual company, perhaps. We go back and forth quite a lot in our report between the idea of the automotive industry and the automotive companies, both OEMs, tier ones, tier twos, etc. And a lot of the challenges around software and the softwareization, and by extension open source, kind of happen at the industry level. You can change the slide, I believe. And here it's a question of like, what is at stake? Because I think if you look at the automotive industry beyond the individual companies, and there is a question looking back at the last 10 years that perhaps CIOs or CTOs should ask themselves. We've made a large number of decisions around, IT-related decisions, let's say in CTO offices, that I would argue have probably made a lot of sense in terms of the goals set out by the board, let's say the KPIs that have been presented to them, that they are meant to meet as an individual company at the end of the day, aimed at maximizing shareholder value. But where did that put the European automotive industry in a from an industry strategic point of view, in terms of our industry's ability to let it create value from software, leverage open source, and collaborate? And now this is where it gets a little bit controversial, perhaps, because if the industry is not managing this transition in collaborating at a scale necessary for being competitive in software, because of the size of the automotive industry, there is this question of like, is this a mandate for political action even? These conversations happen in Brussels, that it seems like the instinct of keeping knowledge and information within a company is creating this heavy drag for the industry as a whole, especially when the main competition that we're seeing from other geographies are from car companies that are a lot more vertically integrated, and they are software first. And maybe as a small side note here, Johan and I, we didn't make like a big chapter in the report about this, but we've thought an interesting, like kind of anecdotal kind of evidence for the dedication to open source from the automotive industry is that I think one of the interviewees, I suspect it was Mercedes-Benz, had this very nice free and open source software manifesto published. If I'm not mistaken, it was signed and promoted by the CTO. So at C-suite, high executive level, outstanding. Microsoft, not the company historically known for open source, who has gone through a massive internal cultural shift in order to learn how to collaborate more broadly in software. All those statements around the company's embrace of open source, it comes straight from Satya Nadella. It's at CEO level. It is still dealt with as a technical question, specifically for, let's say, the IT or software teams internally in the automotive industry, not as a core company strategic importance. Or for that matter, by extension, we see this, that it's not like valued as a key strategic thing that needs to be sorted at an industry level yet. By extension, and talking about mandates for political action, and I want to really underscore here, we're not arguing for political action specifically, but just saying, like, what is at stake here? There's also the issue of anything creating any, identifying the dependencies of the cars produced. The digital sovereignty conversation is in, I would say 8 out of 10 conversations happen in a context of public sector IT use. What do our governments depend on in order to run? But the 2 out of 10 conversations that I think are equally important, if we look from a societal point of view, is what are the dependencies of our companies and our value chains? And in a more, regionalized, deglobalized world, if you will, building the capacity internally in our companies to have control over our software stacks, it also becomes a strategic political question. And here is where, to get up on my soapbox even more, open source becomes increasingly relevant. Yes, on the one hand, it is just a proxy of being good at software. Software companies, even the ones that are known to only sell proprietary products and services, are very good at open source in terms of building their own set of products and services, because that's how you do it. There's no competitive edge to be gained to build a lot, or like just write the software yourself. As a quick side note on this, one of the interviews that we had made the point that the open source program office in that company was very proud to have set the goal that they're gonna 50%, generally speaking, of the software in their car was in X number of years was gonna be open source. 50%. That means that they're gonna write 50% of the code themselves. That sounds very costly and slow, if you at least compare it to a software company. The percentage of open source in modern software products, it's up in the 90s. You compete on a way further up in the technology stack. And there is where it kind of comes together, right? You can have both digital sovereignty and arguably more competitiveness. It is getting control over technology while at the same time creating things faster and at scale and maintaining global collaboration. And I remember we were both at a workshop at the European Commission with actually some of the people that we had interviewed for this report as well. And I asked them, like, what is at stake? What happens if the European automotive industry does not get open source right in the next few years? And the answer, I think here, this is an audience where this answer resonates with, but the companies are toast. That was the response. We won't compete. We won't be competitive. And when that is put forward as like what is at stake, that is again when it becomes a political question, a strategic question for society, because of the thousands and thousands of people that are being today by the automotive industry. So just this is where a lot of our conversations kind of ended up in our exchanges with both open source people and companies, but also governments. So, Johan, I think you can change to the next slide now. I focused mostly here on the recommendations for governments and the Commission. I think this might be worth discussing a little bit more. It would be great to hear questions from you on how you see a role of the public sector or government in this, considering the what's at stake. But I would also encourage you to take a look at the report. We have a fairly long list of recommendations for decision makers in the automotive industry, so in the individual companies. I think we didn't include it here mostly because it's kind of a wish list of open source people in the automotive industry that they would like to put forward to. You will recognize a lot of things that I bet you have already argued for internally. But one of the big takeaways there is how much interesting activity happens kind of bottom up in the automotive industry and in the companies. But it really tends to just hit a glass ceiling, either with compliance departments or just the legal department or the IP department, or very often it's just not prioritized by C-suite, who are, generally speaking, have worked in the companies when it was mostly about bending metal. And there is this big question about buy-in from the highest level of the company and top-down transition. The requests that kind of bottom up the demand from the software teams, that is clear, but something needs to happen at a higher level. And this has been identified by, for example, the European Commission as well. There are a lot of challenges with just convincing management of companies to get more comfortable with collaboration. So here also, our recommendation to the governments and the Commission, well, many classic things here as well. Just promote and engage with open standards. Make sure that the standards that are being either implemented as a result of regulation, like through harmonized standards, that they are open. And I mean here open not in terms of how they're developed, but I mean open in terms of being implementable in open source. That the standards that are needed to comply with regulation are not by themselves blockers of more open source uptake, deployment, and collaboration. Now, support more open source software R&D. Absolutely. This is actually happening, I would say. Maybe not at the scale as we at our think tank would like to see, but there is definitely a lot more money being deployed specifically into, for example, SDV research projects, but also just references to the research outputs being released as open source in the big research funds and the calls for projects is becoming way more prevalent. Establish functional safety norms. Well, this we have to some extent, right? We have a lot safer cars today than we did just 10, 20, 30 years ago. But again, understanding those in relation to collaborating outside of one company will be crucial to just, identify and hopefully make different hindrances smaller for more collaboration. And education on open source. This is exactly the role of, let's say, a government or commission, how to educate. This is a very broad point. One way of just doing this is to further from governments to indicate that they prefer activities and technologies developed by companies in their jurisdictions to be released as open source. Arguably, a great argument for this is just the economic impact. There are a lot of great externalities if you release more open source in your economy. There's solid research on. But specifically for the automotive industry, there is an argument to celebrate and acknowledge companies and perhaps company leaders that are making strides when it comes to implementing open source strategies and really becoming, automotive companies becoming great open source citizens. A bit of praise has helped a lot in the past to change behavior in many different industries in Europe. And we believe, and here is where it touches this question of political mandate as well. One of the big conclusions that we have drawn from not just this study, but a lot of research that we've done at OFE in the past few years, is that it is time to look at open source and Europe's capability of creating value from open source as a geopolitical concern. And I mean this on the one hand, as it's key for our future competitiveness. It's not just the automotive industry that is becoming softwareized, it's society as a whole. And then beyond that, open source is not too dissimilar from standardization. You need participants. We need European participants from our companies to participate, shape, and contribute to open source projects. Now, there is, I would say, generally speaking, in the European automotive industry, a very established appreciation of the role of standards and standardization when it comes to shaping the technology of tomorrow. With the general softwareization of mobility as a whole, there is a question if, for example, is there a standard, or let's say a decision made in a working group in a standards body that is in any way close to being as important as a decision taken in, let's say, the cloud native, or like CNCF, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, in terms of, just technological changes to one of the kind of core cloud projects. Decisions made in Kubernetes, is that going to have actually more impact in shaping the future technology than, let's say, a standard specifically to one industry? Because automotive is now part of this broader software world. And then finally, and this perhaps is something that this is something we recommend to everyone always, but engaging with global open source software sustainability efforts. Step one there is to understand the software that your company or your industry depends on. We cannot just be passive users of open source. We need to understand what we use, how it works, the sustainability challenges, if there are dependencies that we don't have control over, and we cannot just leave that to someone else. This means that, for an individual company, needs to start investing, needs to invest time and resources in understanding its supply chain. A very good place to start is getting very well acquainted with and producing your own SBOMs, but then also drawing the bigger conclusions from this. As an industry, does the European automotive industry have some peculiar dependencies that need to be taken care of that, let's say, other more broad global sustainability efforts will put further down their priority lists? It's your own responsibility to understand what you depend on. Now, end of big soapbox homework lessons from me, but I hope that I could perhaps just dial up and change the perspective a little bit on why the work that you do in Eclipse SDV or in your companies matter. And even if you don't have perhaps support from, let's say, management or C-suite in your company, you will have support from a political government and, let's say, EU level. Because if you don't figure out this kind of collaboration, for which open source is in some ways, again, a proxy, it's a model of this kind of collaboration at a higher strategic level, you will have general support. It matters for Europe's future digital sovereignty and competitiveness. End of rant. Johan. Maybe we can go over to I have some discussion questions as well, and see if there are some questions from the audience.
Just before, I just wanted to add, because you had many good points, but one I just wanted to iterate is this aspect of digital sovereignty being being able to take your free technical decisions based on your own values and so on and so forth, and maintaining competitiveness and also the sustainability. All of this really requires that you are active in the collaborations that you go in, and not just consume open source to really, because open source, I mean, that's a public good. And if a competitor is starting to drive the project, or actors from a specific region is driving the project in their direction, and there's no set of actors from the other side helping to maintain a more balanced direction of the development, open source can be very skewed. So really to maintain competitiveness and maintain sovereignty, you need to be within the communities, in the collaborations. Just as you said about standardizations, you need to be in the room, or in the community rather, contribute and help drive the discussions, help promote your agenda, so that balances against the voices of the others in the community. I think that's very important to consider. So it's not just enough about just consuming or using open source and then everything is fine. You need to be active and really, yeah, take part and engage and be a driver in these collaborations for much of the benefits to envisage in the end. I think those were or was this the discussion point you were talking about?
Yeah, I don't remember, but maybe that's just worth keeping up and just see. We need to encourage some people
Yeah.
to ask some questions. I saw a colleague, so
Yes.
if no one else is asking a question, I will ask Nick to ask a question, make something up.
Well, I just wanted to take this quick opportunity also to thank you both for the excellent presentation. And yeah, if anybody in the audience can please put their questions in the Ask a Questions tab, or the chat, that would be amazing. If not, I guess it was Nick Astor that you wanted to call out.
Yeah, I thought I don't know if he joined at the end. I saw him registered earlier at least, and if but please somebody put in a question. Otherwise, I'll just keep on poking at
Okay.
the European car companies to that they need to get better at open source.
Well, I have a couple of points as we wait for people to ask some questions here. So the SDV Vision white paper is available. I will provide it in the link for everybody to take an opportunity here and read it. And then also we have big news, very, very, very big news. We have OCX, which is our flagship event, also known or previously known as EclipseCon, is being hosted in Germany from October 22nd to 24th. And there is a section, a co-located event for the automotive. And so the call for papers is open, and we encourage anybody that is interested in hosting a talk at OCX to do so. It is still open, and I will also link it further on in the chat as well. So I don't see any questions, my friends. There's no questions in the chat or the Ask a Questions tab. So thank you both again very, very much. And if somebody wanted to reach out to you guys, if they did have questions at a later date, did you want to share a LinkedIn account or an email address? We're happy to to put it there in the chat as well.
Sure, give me a second, and I'll find my LinkedIn account. I'm happy to chat more.
Amazing.
Maybe to leave with one controversial question for you to think about. You should ask yourselves if you think that European automotive companies are better or worse at open source than the public sector and governments, and if it's very different. There was one of the points made from a government official that it seems to be very similar between governments and automotive companies. Let me see how I find. Oh, you shared your email, Jon?
Yeah, I just wrote the email.
Okay, wait.
Keep it simple.
Here is just here's my LinkedIn.
Amazing.
Well,
Cool.
Serena, thank you very much for having us here.
Thank you both
Super.
again so much. And we look forward to having you very soon. Take care, everyone.